Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I've been meaning to do this for quite some time, but I never really had a chance to type it all out. I'm going to try to make this a one-shot. I've noticed over my years that it usually produces the most easy-to-follow writing. Forgive the errors. What I am about to write is true. Now, I know a lot of stories start with that. I know a lot of those stories are taken with a grain of salt. I usually keep an open mind, though, because I have witnessed some fairly strange things and people in my time. With that being said, what I am about to write is a retelling of my experiences. Judge them as you see fit. First, a little backstory. When I was younger, I used to watch my brother run campaigns with his friends. I believe it started with the second edition. He received these books from our older cousin. He said he was growing out of them. Anyway, that's how I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons at first. It was a fairly strange pastime to have, considering we were all middle-class Hispanic kids. I'm half Cuban, half Pakistani, from Hialeah. When I was about 13, my brother had a fair amount of 3.5 books stacked. It was during this time that I decided to start up my own group. I played with 3 friends. Other friends came and went, but these 3 managed to stick with me throughout most of my sessions. The story revolves mostly around a kid called Jonathan, and Jonathan was the rich one, but he didn't share the usual dickish traits. He was the tallest out of all my friends, brown-haired and horrific acne. The acne cleared up a little later. He was the most athletic one as well. I believe he had like 20 pounds of muscle on me, and I was fat at the time. Anyway, we would play Dungeons and Dragons at least every week. At this time I was really close to Jonathan because I lived like 2 blocks away from him. Because of this, I was usually at his house playing video games or reading some Dungeons and Dragons shit. My mom felt bad that she couldn't offer him food due to money troubles, so she didn't like having him over. Because we were so close, and it was summer break, Jonathan's mom asked me if I wanted to go with him to the Dominican Republic. I told her that there was no way I could afford it, and she said that it was fine, and I just needed to bring money for food, souvenirs. I said, "Word up, friend." Well, not really, but I said I just needed to ask my parents. My dad was cool with it, but my mom was a little iffy about the subject. Still, I was allowed to go in the end. Here's where shit started getting weird. On the bus stop over there, sitting with Johnny on the little bench, waiting to take 2 more buses to head to the airport. Little old man comes out of fucking nowhere. I get out of my seat and offer it to the old man. He looks at me and Johnny, staring at us hard as fuck before he finally sits down. Me and Johnny getting a little weirded out. I go over and stand next to Johnny. Little old man staring Johnny down the entire time. He says in Spanish, "You two should go home." I didn't know Spanish very well, so I nudge Johnny and motion to the old man. He translates for me later. Johnny just tells him that we're going on a trip. The old man just shakes his head, doing that rambling, no thing that old Hispanics do. He starts edging away from us on the bench, still rambling quietly to himself. Now, this guy didn't look deranged. He looked generally well kempt, and he was wearing a tan button-up shirt and nice pants. But he was acting strange as fuck. Johnny and I were a little creeped out, and this time. Luckily, the bus came around 5 minutes after, and we hastily grabbed our shit and jumped on. The old man ended up sitting about 3 rows in front of us, and he kept looking back every few minutes throughout the remainder of the ride. After we reached the second bus stop, he kept looking at us through the window until it finally left. That was the first weird thing to happen to us. Sometimes I wonder if it was just some crazy bastard, or an actual sign. I think he might have thought we were a little too close. To be honest, old Hispanic people hate people like that. After my experience in the Dominican Republic, I try to keep an open mind to spiritual shit. Anyway, after the business with the bus, we go over to the airport, after the 9/11 scare, and we're off to the Dominican Republic. The actual plane ride was fairly smooth and we dicked around the whole time. It wasn't a long flight at all. When we landed, I was pretty surprised at how well kept the airport was. I was expecting this place to be a shithole. We are greeted by Johnny's cousin who takes us to grab our stuff and leave to the parking lot. We must have been in a tourist-centric part of the place because it was slamming. There were people from all over, there was music, there were neat little shops here and there, but we seemed to pass by all of this as we drove down a road. And drove. We must have been driving for a good long while because I remember falling asleep. Quite the feat considering I was visiting a foreign country. When I woke up, it was nighttime and we were passing through a rinky-dink village with a dirt road. This place looked like homeless people built it out of driftwood. The wood was all cracked and molded on the side. The shutters were made with those rigid slabs of aluminum, and the only light that was shown was with these dim and flickering stadium lights. By the grace of God, we continue driving by the place. We end up going further to this little hill surrounded by forest, with a house resting at its peak. The hill was small, by the way, only raised about 5 feet from the forest around it. The house itself was surprisingly well made in comparison to the village. It was made from bricks and had an actually shingled roof. It was a little small by most people's standards, but it was cozy as fuck looking. It also seemed to have electricity. I later learned it was generators. I end up meeting the whole fucking clan, as there was like 10 people living in that small little house. We get by with my friend's translations, my rudimentary Spanish, and a lot of hand signals. Everything is all good for that first night. The second day is a little different. Johnny's cousin needed to head to the village, so he decided he would take us along. We jump in his cousin's car and head down the road. When we get to the village, it is freaking bumping. There are people everywhere, which is a stark difference from its nightlife. Johnny's cousin must have had one of the few cars in this part of the Dominican Republic. I couldn't see anyone else with one. We end up parking next to a little house and walking to the main market on foot. It was a dirt path, but it wasn't full of shit or garbage. It seemed like people picked up after themselves. So, Julien, pronounced Julian, I am probably spelling it wrong, but it's a boy's name, is visiting the market owner's father. I think he's making a deal or something and he tells Johnny he's going to be there for a while. So, Johnny decides to take me to visit some of his friends that he visits yearly. They were pretty cool, and 2 of them knew English. We ended up playing soccer, which sucked, because it was hot as fuck and I was fat at the time. After a while we just went in the shade and started talking about shit. Eventually the talk went to ghost stories. Now, if you know anything about islanders, you'll know that there is always plenty of folklore when it comes to the paranormal. A lot of it is pretty creepy. Anyway, they start talking about a place that a witch used to live in. The word they called her was bruja, though, and they said she lived in a cave near the edge of the village. Supposedly the villagers drove her away from that place a few years back. At this time I wanted to kind of prove myself to them because of my poor soccer skills. I suggested that we all go there to check it out. Johnny doesn't like being one-upped, so he agreed as well. His friends weren't as enthusiastic, however, and they initially refused to go. They started saying shit about cicadas, tarantulas, snakes, etc. That kind of dissuaded me, but I still wanted to go mostly because I didn't believe in shit like the paranormal at the time. Eventually, we convinced them and we all head out to the cave. Well, long story short, as soon as we saw the cave no one wanted to go in there. It was pretty much a unanimous decision. I was feeling pretty scared. I'm a fucking bitch. So I was looking around for any snakes or spiders. When I turned to look at a bush, I saw a woman standing against a tree and facing us. I couldn't see her face or bottom at all, but she was extremely shapely. She was wearing what looked like a dress with her stomach exposed. I remember she kept rubbing her pelvis. It was a very slow and inviting gesture, which in my youthful mind, got me quite interested. I looked over at my friends as they were still poking around the entrance of the cave and looking at shit. This is the part of the story that I feel the guiltiest. I remember reading somewhere that by responding to an entity, you essentially give it power. In this case, I just thought it was a village woman that was into me. So, being the social butterfly that I am, I decided to wave at her. She immediately stopped rubbing and leaned forward, looking between me and those gathered at the cave. After that, she rested her temple against the tree and just stayed completely still once more. I called out to the group with my eyes still on the figure. They were too busy looking for valuables, so I headed over and tapped Johnny on the shoulder. I said something to the effect of, "That naked chick wants to fuck," and he finally looked over. Naturally, he didn't see shit. After a while, we headed back to the village and I told them what I had just seen. Johnny was like, "Shut up." He didn't think there was much truth to my claim. His friends on the other hand were dead silent. I remember them looking at each other and just started walking to their respective houses. Johnny at the time didn't know much about the folksy side of the Dominican Republic, so he just figured they were trying to scare us. We went back to Julian and waited until he finished talking and then buying shit. As we were driving back to the house, Johnny told his cousin about what I saw and how his friends reacted to it. Immediately his cousin started fucking yelling at him. I could only catch bits and pieces of the argument, but I gathered that he was mad that we went off on our own. Later Johnny told me that his cousin basically confirmed that a bruja used to live in the cave. I was a little creeped out at this point, but I figured a small village needed some sort of entertainment to keep from going insane. He also told me about what I might have seen. It was something called a Ciguapa, and it takes the form of a beautiful woman in order to trap and steal the souls of men. It is clothed in its own hair, and its feet are backwards. Let that settle for a moment. So, me and my friend were scared shitless. It should be noted that we routinely try to scare each other, though. One of us would start, and by the end, both of us would be fucking huddled together like kids. The second night we were pretty much sleeping back to back with our eyes wide open. One of us would jump at a sound, and that would scare the other, eventually making sure that we got no sleep that entire night. After a while, we start hearing a crying sound coming from outside the wall of the house. Since we were on the first floor, it sounded like it was right next to us. Johnny started flipping out, but I just told him it could be cats in heat, a similar sound. He finally calmed down, but the sound kept coming. Like a baby crying. Then, the tapping started to happen. It sounded like someone was tapping with the tip of their nails. We first heard it against the front door, which was about 8 feet away from us. After that, we started to hear it coming from all around the sides of the house, as well as a dull thumping sound on the grass. Not only were we hearing that, we also kept hearing the crying sound grow a bit louder as the sound traveled from the sides of the house. At this point, Johnny seems kind of pissed off. He thinks it's people from the village trying to get inside the house. His family is pretty wealthy compared to everyone else. He looked down at me and said that we had to check it out. I told him he could go fuck himself. After a few moments of arguing and the fact that the noises seemed to almost quiet when we would speak, I decided to come along. He grabbed a machete from the kitchen and I took one of those huge flashlights that requires like 6 double-D batteries. The tapping at this point was coming from the left side of the house. After we braced ourselves, we charged out of the front door and just started sprinting alongside the walls of the house. My flashlight was pointed out to make sure we don't trip on anything. Johnny wasn't yelling, but he was pretty loud and just spouting off threats. We end up doing a full circle around the house and we don't see anything. When we get back to the front door, we hear the thumping sound coming from the dirt road between the two clearings of trees. Naturally, I shine the flashlight in that direction. It's still difficult to describe, even to this day. It was the shape of a woman, but all the enticing curves it previously had were gone. It was staring right at us as it crossed the dirt path, and the features of its face were quite clear. It had no eyes, just black where they were supposed to be. I think it had a nose, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Its face was very skinny and long, with a mouth that was almost tube-like, as if it was just a circle plastered on its face. I can't really explain it well, because its head was always facing us in our direction. Its body was covered slightly by its hair, which easily reached the ground in length. The most unsettling thing about the Ciguapa was the way it walked. Its feet are backwards, so it has a very distinct way of walking. It walked forward on the tip of its toes, then the middle of the foot, then the heel. This caused its body to lurch forward with each step in a very fast and jerking manner. It crossed from one line of trees to the next, crossing the dirt road as it stared at us. It kept its eyes right on us until it eventually disappeared into the forest. I don't know what madness overcame us as we watched it, but it was like we were frozen. I shined the flashlight as it walked, but I was completely unaware of doing it. I remember getting grabbed by Johnny's aunt and getting yanked inside. After she yelled at us for waking the house up, we told her what happened. She immediately started crying and praying. When the rest of the family came down to see what happened, they started praying as well. At the time I just felt numb, and I wasn't aware of the fact that both Johnny and I urinated ourselves. After we changed, we brought our blankets into Johnny's aunt's room and slept next to her and his uncle. We weren't allowed to leave the house without Johnny's uncle and cousin, who were both armed with machetes. We didn't leave this house though. When we heard the crying the next night, Johnny just closed his eyes and told me to go to sleep. I couldn't. I slept through another night of crying and tapping. When it was time to head back home, I made sure not to look into the trees. After we got back to the Miami International, my dad picked us up to take us back to Hialeah. I ended up telling him about what we saw. I wanted him to say that we were talking shit, honestly. I wanted him to completely dismiss it. I felt physically ill when he confirmed our story, though. He said that there is a creature in Pakistan called the churail that shares most of the similarities with the Ciguapa. The most horrifying realization that I had was that these creatures aren't simply confined to one spot. They could be anywhere. Johnny and I are still in contact even to this day. We've both had terrible luck in our lives. From financial troubles to physical ailments and accidents, things have not gone our way. Take what you will from this confession. I know what I saw.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.